This is the FliteCast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Hey, how's everybody doing? Anything happen while I was out? It's been a week. Well, it's actually, has it been a week? Did I record? I don't even remember if I recorded anything last week. I don't think I did. I think the last episode of anything that I recorded was probably Flight Chat. And that was, over a week ago. Yes, that was the last episode. So, there was nothing last week. All right. So, full disclosure, had a busy weekend, was not in town. Absolutely left town for a weekend, a little bit longer than a weekend. I went out west for the first time ever. I went to San Francisco. Shonda and I enjoyed a lovely trip at the behest of my sister, my baby sister, who got married. So, that was a very festive occasion. It was an awesome trip. It ended too quickly, seriously. It was really awesome. Congratulations to her again and her now husband, my new brother-in-law. They're awesome. They're doing well, and a great time was had by all. It was fantastic to see all the family out there and to have a great time, not necessarily in the friendly confines of home here in the Midwest where we're at, but to be out west. Very different vibe, a lot of different stuff out there, things that I've never encountered before. That was an eye-opener in many ways, but definitely something I would love to do again. Definitely traveling is a thing that people should not take for granted. Those of us that are able to do so should not take for granted. It's something that everybody should do. Don't just make your entire life don't make work the only place that you've ever traveled to in your entire life. I'll say that. That's for sure. So was busy. Very busy with respect to that, especially since I was the one officiating the wedding. Yes, I was bestowed that particular responsibility, and it was extremely nerve-wracking. I was shaking all the way up through it. Everybody told me I did an awesome job, which I'm very grateful that everybody enjoyed it, and that, most importantly, that my sister and her husband were pleased with it because it was ultimately their day, and their energy was just awesome the entire weekend. I mean, seriously, it was a really, really awesome time. And so that's where I was. That's where we were. That's why things were on hiatus. That's why the studio was paused, if you will, with respect to that. But a decent amount happened. A whole lot happened, and it wasn't like I wasn't paying attention. I was totally, on my phone, paying attention to the internet. Some crazy shit went down. Some things that I'm definitely not going to talk about on this show that I'm sure all of you are aware of. And you know what? I'm not even. It's one of those things where I am hesitant to even bring it up, even in Flight Chat. So, John, anybody else? I don't know if you want to ask questions about that particular thing, because it's really not something I want to get into, to be honest with you. And there's plenty of other stuff, truthfully, to get into without having to get into some, deep, dark shit with respect to that, because outside of the joy that I was having, outside of the fun that we were having, Shonda and I, with respect to my family and friends and whatnot, there was some other crazy shit going on in the world. And I know that I don't shy away from, talking politics and stuff that goes on in the world, but that's one of those where there's a reason it shouldn't get oxygen. I'll put it that way, and that's the most that I'll say about it, to be honest with you. But there's plenty of other stuff to talk about. We really don't have to get into that. So just prefacing that with respect to any questions anybody wants to send in for the next episode of Flight Chat, which will be this upcoming Sunday. And that's a great segue into the normal spiel, which is to let everybody know, if you haven't listened to this show before, you can find it and my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is Apple Podcast, whether it is the FliteCast YouTube channel where every episode gets posted, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora. The FliteCast is available on all those platforms or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find this show on Tuesdays. You can find Flightbox on Thursdays, which I will endeavor. I will try. I can't 100% promise this, but I'm going to try and get a recap of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3. I've got like 5 or 6 episodes to watch with respect to that, and I will try to get them watched between now and Thursday. We'll see how that works out, especially with me going back to work, but that is the hope, that I can post that particular episode on Thursday. And then Peacemaker, I've got to watch episode 4, because I haven't watched episode 4 yet, and then episode 5 is coming out this Thursday evening, so expect that episode of Flightbox on Saturday. And then, of course, Flight Chat on Sunday for the regular feedback, and I'm sure there's a ton of it. I haven't checked the emails since I've been back, but I'm sure there's been some emails sent, and there'll probably be some more sent, especially with what I just talked about briefly here in the intro. So check all that out at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, especially the FliteCast YouTube channel, or like I said, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Pandora as well, or wherever you get your podcasts, whatever podcatcher you use. And of course, thank you to everybody that has been very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. I've actually got some movies that I watched on our flights on the way there and back that I need to review. And I'm totally going to write flight review episodes for them. Surprise, surprise. There are 3 movies that I've been meaning to watch. One is an oldie but a goodie, an old animated film that is still not attached to the animated franchise I said I wanted to get into, but it's an old animated film that a coworker recently was really recommending that I watch, and I said, okay, I'll watch that if you watch The Rocketeer, because they haven't watched The Rocketeer yet. So tomorrow when I see them at work, I'm going to tell them, hey, I watched it. Have you watched The Rocketeer yet? Because I know they haven't. But either way, an oldie but an animated goodie that was recently compared to Superman. Actually, Superman was compared to it long ago, but people brought up this animated movie as a result of Superman popping up. So look for that review, that episode of Flight Review that will be Patreon exclusive, plus a pair of movies that came out this year that I was really looking forward to. I enjoyed all 3 of the movies that I watched, but this particular pair of films that I watched on the way back to Michigan, I liked one of them and really enjoyed the other, like a lot. Like one of my favorite directors. So stay tuned for those special episodes of Flight Review, Patreon exclusive episodes of Flight Review coming up in the next couple of days or so. And hopefully all of you that have been subscribed, that are flight officers, have been enjoying all of the bonus content at patreon.com/theflightcast. There is more to come. Like I said, the 3 episodes of Flight Review coming up this week. So hope you're enjoying it. And as always, cannot thank you enough for your support to the FliteCast Media Network. All right, people, let's get into it. First things first, we do have a celebrity passing that we need to pay our respects to. This was just announced this morning. Robert Redford, longtime actor, passed at the age of 89. And this is where I have to admit that I have not seen the majority of his filmography. I really have not. In fact, I can't even tell you necessarily the first thing that I saw him in. I don't know. I'm really not sure. I mean, I've heard of him. Obviously, I've heard of him for sure. But so many of these movies I just have not seen all the way through it. And I'm talking about it like his classic films. Like I've never seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I've never seen Downhill Racer. I've never seen The Candidate or The Sting or his version of The Great Gatsby or The Way We Were, 3 Days of the Condor, All the President's Men. I'm going down the list here. The Natural. I saw a lot of people posting about that. Out of Africa. Sneakers. Now, I've seen bits and pieces of Sneakers, but I have never seen it all the way through. I've also seen parts of Indecent Proposal and Up Close and Personal, but nope, have never fully seen them. Same goes with The Last Castle and Spy Game. This is weird. It's one of those where it's like, well, geez, Ray, have you seen anything he has? Yeah, I have. His MCU stuff. I've seen Captain America: The Winter Soldier, obviously, and I've seen Avengers: Endgame. That's it. And I'm like, wait a minute, really? I haven't seen anything else he's done, like not even on TV? Well, he didn't do a whole lot of TV. He did more TV back in the 60s than he did in like last 10, 20 years or whatnot, right? And he was in an episode of Twilight Zone. He was in Untouchables, Dr. Kildare. He was in the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. He was in an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, old black and white episodes of Perry Mason. Yeah, he's an incredible career, right? And absolutely incredible, like ton of career or ton of work in his career, if you will, an incredible body of work. But the closest I've seen to anything of his outside of, like his actual Marvel work and like his actual like filmography is I've seen a movie that he produced, which is a civil action, which that's a good movie, starring John Travolta, a legal drama from 1998. But yeah, there's just a ton of his stuff that I have not watched. I've just never actually sat down and watched. And so, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of personal connection to it, but it is important to pay respects to Robert Redford because he is one of those natural talents. He is one of those that's been around forever and is outspoken. And I think the other biggest thing that somebody brought this up. They talked about how in the Watchmen limited series on HBO, in that timeline, he was president, I think, like instead of Reagan, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because the idea is that Nixon was still president in the 80s, and so Robert Redford, kind of following in the idea behind Ronald Reagan being an actor turned president, and he was the one that like they made the term Redfordations, which was essentially reparations that were paid to black people in that universe. And somebody was saying, that universe might have been a little bit better than the universe we're in now. Tough to argue that with respect to the real world in this regard. But yeah, uh, that's as much as I have as far as personal connection. But obviously, indelible career. Was he awesome as a villain in the MCU? Yes, obviously, Alexander Pierce. I mean, for him to be the villain, the big bad of the best MCU film, without question. So yeah, I'd absolutely give him all props and respect to that. But no, this is just a list of future flight review episodes exclusively for Patreon, right? Where I watch all these movies, right? Where I watch Butch Cassidy, where I watch The Candidate and The Sting and The Way We Were and Great Gatsby and The Natural. Like, this is just an opportunity for me to watch those movies, for me to get caught up on his filmography, to be honest with you. That's how I look at it, to put a positive spin on it, because I don't really have I don't have anything personal to say with respect to my connection to him as an actor, but many have been pouring out their tributes. Many have been saluting him in his career, and definitely somebody, a big enough Hollywood name to remember, even from someone like me who hasn't seen much of his stuff, because he absolutely had an indelible part, played an indelible role, if you will, in many movies and many gifs, right? Odds are you've used a Robert Redford gif at some point in your life on social media, more than likely, right? Even if it's just the one with him in the beard nodding, and I don't even know what movie that's from, right? Might be Butch Cassidy. I have no idea. I don't know. I'll find out when I eventually do watch that movie, and then I'm the Leo DiCaprio gif because I point at the screen going, hey, that's where that gif comes from. All right, cool. But either way, Robert Redford passed at the age of 89. May he rest in peace. Absolutely incredible talent and an indelible career in Hollywood for sure. And to be determined as to how much of his filmography I actually enjoy going forward. But I will watch some of it in the not too distant future. No question about that. So before that unfortunate announcement, the happy news that happened earlier this week was the Emmys. The Emmys were this past weekend, and of course I did not watch, I did not partake, because you know how I feel about award shows. I don't really partake in those, but I do pay attention to who wins, and I do salute who wins. And we had some big winners as far as like in nerd circles, right? The big winners in nerd circles, wasn't necessarily the studio, although I know a lot of you have talked about the studio, and that they cleaned up. Like Seth Rogen and the studio cleaned up 13 wins in the Emmys. My goodness, right? And then of course Adolescence and The Pit also went. Now that was also something, just really briefly to talk about, because I haven't watched the studio yet. That's on my long list of Apple TV Plus schedule. But congrats to all of them. I don't know who the what was it, Sal Saperstein, the person that so many people said on threads that Seth Rogen should have thanked, and it was ridiculous that he didn't. I really don't know what that whole story is about, but either way, okay, I'll adjudicate that for the time being. But Adolescence, I haven't watched that either, but Stephen Graham, learned something about him. Did not know that he was mixed race. Did not know that. Found that out truthfully from Wally U reposting a video of him, and like the video of his acceptance speech the other night at the Emmys, and was completely unaware that like his grandfather was Jamaican. It's like, wow, okay, this whole time he's mixed race actor. That's awesome, which is fantastic. You know how I feel about representation matters. It's important, no matter what anybody out there tells you. It's absolutely important, and so that's cool. That was really cool to learn that little tidbit about Stephen Grant, who's an awesome actor, has been in many things other than the Venom films recently. I think the last thing I saw him in that I really liked was Greyhound. He was in that movie, the World War II naval movie with Tom Hanks. He was great in that. Boardwalk Empire, so many other things. He's got a long list of credits, and so apparently he's done very well with The Adolescents. And The Pit, I mean, insert medical drama here that gets Emmy attention. This one, of course, coming from HBO Max. Noah Wiley, who's an ER veteran, is at the center of that. I have not watched it. Shonda has. She enjoyed it, but yeah. So big wins for them. But no, on to the nerdy shit. 9 Emmy wins for the Penguin. Now, 8 of them were Creative Arts Emmys, but the big one, the big primetime Emmy win, Kristen Milioti. How about that? Kristen Milioti winning Best Supporting Actress in a Drama, right? If I'm not mistaken, that's what the category was with respect to her win. Not lead actor, not lead actress, or was it lead actress? Hang on. Scrolling through here. No, it wasn't lead actress. That went to Severance. Britt Lower in Severance. No. uh, Best Lead Actress in a Limited or Anthology Series. There we go. The Penguin. There we go. She was up against Rashida Jones from Black Mirror, Kate Blanchett from Disclaimer, Michelle Williams from Dying for Sex, and Megan Fahey from Sirens. That's huge. That's awesome. Because, I mean, those of us that saw The Penguin, Kristen Milioti was an absolute, an unstoppable force in The Penguin. She was outstanding as Sofia Falcone Gigante, if you will. She did a phenomenal job, enough to the point where you hope she's in the Batman Part 2. You really do. Or at least I do, right? Especially, the way that the show ended, and the letter that she received from her cousin, if you will. Oh, yes, absolutely. Want to see that interaction. Although, I think I'm hearing that Zoe Kravitz is not going to be in the Batman Part 2. I don't know. Haven't heard all those details, like, that recently got spelled. I think Matt Reeves recently was somewhere and talked about that. That's more of the catch up that I've got to do. Dave the Film Junkie posted a video about that. But congratulations to Kristen. I mean, that absolute tour de force in that show was absolutely phenomenal and most certainly deserved the accolades with respect to that. If Colin Farrell wasn't going to win it, then certainly she should have, and she most certainly did. And so absolute kudos and congratulations to her for that particular Emmy win. And then congratulations to Andor. 5 Emmys. 5 Emmy victories for Andor. And, I appreciate that so many people are appreciative of the message, especially of Andor Season 2. When you win for outstanding writing for a drama series, with Welcome to the Rebellion, oh yeah, like there you have it, right? And that's the quintessential episode, right? Other than the Gorman Massacre, that's the big one. That's Genevieve O'Reilly's big speech as Mon Mothma, right? And of course, I did see a headline saying, well, that Andor's biggest Emmy win highlights also its biggest snub because, of course, she did not get nominated for Mon Mothma. But that's a tough one because while I would not have minded her winning for Mon Mothma whatsoever, I get why that's difficult with an ensemble cast, right? Because like you got to nominate her, you got to nominate Diego Luna, of course, as Cassian Andor. You've got to nominate others in that cast and crew. It's difficult with an ensemble cast, right? Like, how do you Denise Huff, of course, right? Is for her character turn as Dedra. How about Kyle Soller for his turn as Cyril Karn? Like, come on, there's a lot there, and when you have a really strong ensemble cast, it can be difficult to single out one actor or actress for a nomination. So I get it. With an ensemble, and with an ensemble as strong as Andor, yeah, that's a tough call. So I understand why she wasn't nominated, but at least, they did win the Emmy for the writing for that particular episode because they most certainly deserved that. I mean, seriously, that show, my goodness, season 2. I mean, the whole Andor series is phenomenal, but that series, that second season, incredible. Winner, they also won for Outstanding Fantasy Sci-Fi Costumes, Outstanding Production Design for a Narrative Period or Fantasy Program, 1 hour or more, Outstanding Picture Editing for a Drama Series, and Outstanding Special Visual Effects in a Season or a Movie. Outstanding. Andor getting all the praise, getting all the accolades, as we would want a show like that to receive. So yeah, some nerdy wins, right? Some nerd franchises getting wins. Star Wars and DC absolutely collecting Emmys this past weekend, and those are the ones that we really care about. I mean, there's other stuff too. Listen, I understand. Severance collected quite a bit, and I know there's plenty of other TV that all of you have watched that I have not gotten caught up on that also won big with respect to the Emmys, and I'll get to it. I will. At some point, I'll watch The Studio. At some point, I will watch Severance. And The White Lotus, I know that was nominated for a number of things. I don't know what it won. But just looking at the list of all these nominees, so much on Apple TV Plus, and then you throw in stuff like Abbott Elementary and The Bear, and it's like, okay, long list, way too much shit to watch. But, that's as much as I have to say for the Emmys because I haven't seen, any of these shows and I did not watch the Emmys. But congratulations to everyone, and certainly congratulations to The Penguin and to Andor for their big wins as well. All right, now let's get into the big stuff and talk Warner Brothers. And this is where some of the political stuff probably will intersect. And I get it for this particular subject. It's understandable because it's kind of confusing. The last couple of weeks have been kind of confusing in the news cycle with respect to Warner Brothers. Because if you Google search Warner Brothers success, then what the AI overview on Google is going to tell you is that Warner Brothers is experiencing a period of notable success due to its recent slate of films, which includes the record-breaking streak of 7 consecutive movies opening with over $40 million at the box office, such as the Minecraft movie Superman and Weapons. The success is driven by a commitment to creativity, a diverse range of successful franchises like the Harry Potter and DC universe, and a strategic focus on original stories and established horror series. The strong box office performance has contributed to a significant 55% year-over-year revenue increase for the company's studios and has been instrumental in Warner Bros. Discovery's swing to profitability in the second quarter of 2025. That's what the AI aggregate tells you when you Google search this. And sure enough, it's got bullet points, right? Record-breaking streak, key titles, financial impact, the key drivers of success, diverse content strategy, proven franchises, focus on quality and vision. Yes, it would seem that the flip side of Pam Abdy and Michael DeLuca's tenure as the stewards of Warner Brothers Pictures has flipped. We heard earlier this year that they might be on the out, right? Like they weren't going to be long for their jobs in that regard. And it seems that both they and David Zaslav have turned things around, right? It's even saying here, historical context and future outlook, adapting to the market. Warner Brothers has a long history of adapting to technological and media shifts, ensuring its continued relevance in the global entertainment landscape. Post-merger turnaround. Following significant corporate changes and restructuring, Warner Bros. Discovery Studios are now a powerful engine for the company's profitability, showcasing a successful turnaround from earlier challenges. And commitment to theatrical, where it says the company maintains a commitment to a robust slate of theatrical releases, which has proven to be a successful strategy in the current market. Again, this is what Google's AI summary tells you from all the news articles, from all the sources with respect to why they've turned the corner. So you read that and you think, oh, okay, well, they're in good shape. Let's see what happens. And then you read this from cordcutternews.com. This was a couple of days ago. This was first posted. Headline says, Warner Brothers Discovery hopes Amazon, Apple, or Netflix will buy its struggling company. Wait a minute, what? Will buy its struggling company. And yeah, I didn't mention the P word yet. We're going to get to that. But that's the headline that I saw the other day from cordcuttersnews.com. And cordcuttersnews.com, for people who don't know, that is the source that I've used for years, going all the way back to my old job, to pay attention to current news in the industry with respect to the streaming era, right? The streaming age and what streamers are doing going forward. And this particular writer, I've read plenty of their stuff, and I've sourced this particular site multiple times, going all the way back to, I think I've even sourced this a few times, more than a few times, on Fans Without Borders, if I'm not mistaken, over at SquadCast Media. But this article says that the media industry is undergoing a seismic shift as Warner Brothers Discovery's chief executive David Zaslav maneuvers to ignite a fierce bidding war for his sprawling conglomerate, even while David Ellison's freshly merged Paramount Skydance gears up for a massive multi-billion-dollar acquisition push to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. Oh, wait, timeout. There it is. Let's just click on that link and message or mention that footnote, if you will, because that goes back to the September 11th post. Paramount wants to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, merging Paramount Plus and HBO Max. Again, from the same writer, Luke Boma on Cord Cutters News, in a move that could reshape the entertainment industry. It says Paramount Skydance is gearing up to launch a majority cash bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, backed by the influential Ellison family. For people who don't know, David Ellison, of course, is the now owner and CEO of Paramount and Skydance Entertainment, and his father, Larry Ellison, is the CEO of Oracle, and he's either the second or the fourth richest person on planet Earth. I think even more so than Elon Musk. In fact, he may have just passed Elon Musk, because obviously Elon has had a really awful year. That's what happens when you're a South African Nazi. Anyway, I digress. It says that sources close to the situation indicate that the offer targets the entire company, encompassing its extensive cable networks and renowned movie studio, according to the Wall Street Journal. This ambitious pursuit comes as Warner Bros. Discovery navigates its own transformation, having announced late last year a restructuring plan to divide into two distinct operating units, one dedicated to its traditional cable television operations and the other centered on streaming services and film production. Yes, we knew about that. Two different divisions, one called Streaming and Studios, which would be Warner Brothers, and then Global Linear Networks, which would be Discovery Global, right? Streaming and Studios, obviously, would encompass TV production, HBO brand, DC Studios, Warner Brothers Games, focusing on creative storytelling. The Global Linear division, Global Linear Networks, that is, would be all the legacy cable networks like CNN, Discovery Channel, and HGTV, along with international operations and streaming services like Discovery Plus. Right. We knew about that already, but this is saying that Paramount wants to buy all of it. And it says the potential deal represents a monumental leap for Paramount Skydance, whose market capitalization hovers around $15 billion, while Warner Brothers Discovery boasts nearly $33 billion. Well, how can they afford that? That's intriguing. No formal bid has been tendered yet, and the negotiations remain fluid with the possibility of the plans unraveling entirely. Market reactions have been swift and pronounced, with Warner Brothers Discovery shares surging 26% following the initial reports, reflecting investor enthusiasm for the prospect of consolidation. Paramount Skydance shares, that is, climbed 9.1%, underscoring the buzz surrounding this high-stakes endeavor. Again, this is from cordcutternews.com. It says, by positioning itself to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery ahead of the company's planned split, Paramount Skydance aims to sidestep a potential frenzy of competing offers for the streaming and studios division. Industry observers note that tech giants like Amazon and Apple, flush with resources, could enter the fray, driving up valuations and complicating any breakup scenario. This preemptive strategy allows Paramount Skydance to secure this full portfolio, including legacy assets that might be otherwise undervalued or overlooked in a fragmented sale. Okay, I get it. They're trying to buy it before the division happens. All right, now this is making more sense to me. It says, should the acquisition succeed, it would forge a powerhouse by uniting two of Hollywood's most iconic studios under one roof. The combined entity would control a vast library of content, blending Warner Brothers' blockbuster franchises such as the DC Comics universe, the Harry Potter series, and the cultural phenomenon behind Barbie with Paramount's storied catalog. On the television front, the merger would integrate Warner's acclaimed series like The White Lotus alongside cable staples from networks including CNN, TBS, and TNT. Streaming services would see HBO Max and Paramount Plus converge, potentially creating a dominant platform capable of challenging rivals in the crowded digital space. Yeah, and hopefully they would use HBO Max's onboard system, right? Their user interface, because the one for Paramount Plus is in desperate need of overhaul. But it says Paramount Skydance itself is no stranger to transformative deals, having recently finalized its merger with Paramount Global just weeks ago. That transaction brought under its umbrella beloved brands like Nickelodeon, MTV, and Comedy Central, bolstering its animation and youth-oriented programming. Led by the aforementioned David Ellison, the son of Oracle co-founder and billionaire Larry Ellison, the company has demonstrated a knack for strategic growth, leveraging family resources to fuel expansion in a volatile media landscape, that is. The Ellison's family involvement adds significant financial muscle to the bid, it says. Drawing on their vast wealth and tech-savvy perspective, Larry Ellison's background in software and data analytics could prove invaluable in optimizing the merged operations, particularly in enhancing streaming algorithms and content distribution. David Ellison has long focused on blending traditional filmmaking with innovative production techniques, and acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery would amplify those efforts on a grand scale. However, and this is the last couple of paragraphs here, the path forward is fraught with challenges. It says the sheer size of the deal invites intense scrutiny from antitrust regulators who may view the consolidation of major studios and streaming assets as a threat to competition. The Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice have ramped up oversight of media mergers in recent years, citing concerns over market concentration and consumer choice. Warner Brothers Discovery's cable network, still a revenue driver despite cord-cutting trends, could complicate approvals, as could the overlap in premium content offerings. For Warner Brothers Discovery, it says, the timing of this overture aligns with its ongoing pivot away from linear TV toward digital dominance. The company's restructuring aims to streamline operations amid declining cable subscriptions, but absorbing it into Paramount Skydance could accelerate that shift while preserving synergies across news, sports, and entertainment. Analysts suggest that the deal might streamline costs, such as shared production facilities and marketing budgets, ultimately benefiting shareholders through economies of scale. Well, there's that plus. But it also says, as Hollywood grapples with streaming wars, economic pressures, and evolving viewer habits, this potential union signals a broader trend toward consolidation. Smaller players struggle to compete with tech behemoths, making alliances like this one essential for survival. If Paramount Skydance pulls off the acquisition, it could redefine content creation, distribution, and monetization for years to come, setting the stage for a new era in global entertainment. So that was the footnote. That was the first article that Luke Boma posted 5 days ago with respect to this idea that Paramount wants to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. And now let's go back to the original piece that I was citing here with respect to the bidding war that David Zaslav might be trying to engineer now. Because it says this development, emerging just weeks after Skydance sealed its $8.4 billion union with Paramount Global, underscores a broader frenzy for consolidation In an era where legacy Hollywood studios grapple with dwindling cable revenues and the relentless rise of streaming behemoths. Zaslav, known for his aggressive cost-slashing tactics that have trimmed $35 billion in debt since the 2022 Warner Discovery merger, now sees an opportune moment to leverage external interest and potentially catapult the company's stock from its recent $16 perch toward an ambitious $40 per share valuation, effectively doubling its $40 billion market cap. Wow, anybody invest in Warner Brothers lately? How about that? We'd heard about this years ago, right? When we heard that David Zaslav was taking over as the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, one of the first things that I heard was the idea that he would spit shine and polish up the company just to flip it back to Universal. That was the studio we'd heard a couple years ago, that he was going to spin it to Universal. And that piqued our interest because still in the waning days of the DCEU, we thought about Universal Studios, didn't we? We talked about this before, didn't we? About the idea of them making a DC Studios theme park, if you will. We thought about that, right? Just like how there's an Avengers campus at Disneyland out in California, and there's other Marvel rides at the Florida one as well, at Disney World. The idea of, ooh, how about a real-life Gotham City or a real-life Metropolis? Yeah, fan brain kicked in, and we thought about that possibility. But there's a whole lot of other red tape, just like there was with the Disney Fox purchase 7 years ago. Can you believe it's been 7 years since Disney bought Fox? How about that? Remember all the stuff that went on with that? Different landscape, just a bit right now. But continuing with this current piece, it says, at the heart of this intrigue is Zaslav's proactive outreach to Goldman Sachs bankers earlier this week, where he probed appetites from tech titans like Amazon, Apple, and Netflix, according to the New York Post. These players, flush with cash from diverse revenue streams, have long eyed traditional media's treasure troves of intellectual property to bolster their own content ecosystems. Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV Plus, for instance, have poured billions into original productions but crave the established franchises Warner holds. Think DC Comics superheroes, HBO's prestige dramas, and the Warner Brothers film library, spanning classics to blockbusters. Netflix, ever voracious for subscriber bait, could integrate Warner's assets to fortify its global dominance. Zaslav's strategy appears calculated, it says. By teasing a competitive auction, he aims to extract premium value, and if bids fall short, he intends to harness the resulting stock surge for targeted content acquisitions, ensuring Warner remains a creative powerhouse and amid uncertainty. So Zaslav is smelling blood in the water. He knows that at this point in time, he has a library and he has licensing that all the big boys want, all the big players want. And this is all kind of sparked from David Ellison and Paramount, making the first initial pitch, right? Like, they move their chess piece into the center, they move all their chips into the center of the table, and they go, hey, we want to make this move. And so Zaslav goes, interesting. You want all of what we've got. Let's see if I can attract the highest bidder. Like, that's what David Zaslav wants, a bidding war, because that lines his pocket. That fills his bank account even further than the however many $1 million bonus he got that all the workers and whatnot were pissed off about. Remember that article, right? Greed fuels all of this. Remember what I just said. Greed fuels all of this. This is going to matter when I talk about all the political stuff that everybody's worried about going forward. But here, let's continue with the rest of this piece. There's a couple paragraphs left in this piece. It says, Ellison's impending all-cash overture, reportedly valuing Warner Brothers Discovery at over $70 billion, including debt, adds urgency and drama to the saga. Backed by the Ellison family's immense fortune, Larry Ellison, Oracle's co-founder and a close associate of President Trump, boasts a net worth nearing $400 billion, fueled by AI-driven optimism. This bid positions Skydance as a swift empire builder. Just months after navigating regulatory hurdles for the Paramount deal, including commitments to editorial oversight at CBS News, Ellison is racing to preempt rivals. Acquiring Warner outright would fuse iconic studios, merging Paramount's storied film legacy with Warner's animation and superhero empires, while uniting HBO Max's 100 million subscribers with Paramount Plus's 78 million to challenge Netflix and Disney in the streaming wars. Yet, it says this audacious move raises eyebrows. Why swallow the entire entity, baggage and all, before Zaslav's planned April 2026 split into a studio streaming arm and a cable networks unit? Analysts speculate it's a preemptive strike, securing synergies in content production and distribution before piecemeal sales dilute value. And then here's the big paragraph that I know so many of you are worried about, and I understand it, I get it, but it says, the political undercurrents amplify the stakes. Under the Trump administration, merger scrutiny has softened compared to the Biden era's antitrust clampdown, which derailed numerous deals across sectors. Yeah, that is an understatement. Trump's first term saw the AT&T Time Warner merger ultimately prevail in court, though it later unraveled, paving the way for Discovery's involvement. With Larry Ellison's ties to Trump, it says, regulators might view this consolidation favorably, especially as it aligns with a pro-business ethos. Wall Street bankers anticipate green lights for such tie-ups, viewing them as lifelines for cash-strapped media firms. However, challenges loom. It says Warner's cable assets like CNN, TNT, and Discovery Channel face cord-cutting erosion, and integrating them with Paramount's MTV and Nickelodeon could invite antitrust probes over market concentration in news and entertainment. Oh, those probes are already happening. Senator Elizabeth Warren, already tweeted against this merger earlier today. She posted on Threads, and I think she also posted on Twitter. I believe she's still on Twitter. She already posted that this was a bad idea. And lawmakers, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, are already eyeing this and saying it's a terrible idea, and a lot of people are worried about the political aspirations of this. And it says Zaslav's pivot from austerity to auctioneer reflects a maturing media landscape where tech's hunger collides with Hollywood's heritage. Yeah, I suppose you could say that, or maybe it's just his greed. Yeah, I know we read that whole story a year or so ago about David Zaslav being romantic about movies and the theatrical presentation, and he's all important and all involved, and the romanticism of Hollywood and the business. Now, he wants money. He's a one percenter that wants money. He's Gordon Gekko, in the evolution of Gordon Gekko in that regard. They all are. So this pivot from austerity to auctioneer was never a pivot. He's been an auctioneer from day one. I've never believed from any point, at any point whatsoever, that he was actually austere with his intent in that regard. And anybody that does, sorry, you're a bit naive. Because at the end of the day, as much as we love these movies, as much as we love these studios and the content and the franchises and whatnot, Hollywood is still a business owned and operated by one percenters. And if the strikes last year didn't clue you into that, then bless your heart. I don't know what to tell you. But this last paragraph says that Jay Penske, the media entrepreneur behind Variety and Rolling Stone, has floated interest in CNN, though Zaslav dismissed it as undervalued. If a bidding war erupts, it could redefine power dynamics, birthing a super conglomerate rivaling Comcast or Disney. For shareholders, the allure of a cash exit trumps waiting on restructuring gambles. Ultimately, this chess match highlights Zaslav's savvy, transforming vulnerability into leverage. He positions Warner not as a fading giant, but as the prize in entertainment's next chapter. As bids crystallize, the industry watches breathlessly, betting on whether Ellison's boldness or Zaslav's brinksmanship will prevail. All right. I know I just threw a lot at you with respect to two different articles, but here's the deal, right? In a nutshell, David Ellison, who's the now CEO of Paramount Skydance, he wants Warner Brothers. He's going to make a big cash offer for that. And in this case, market cap doesn't matter because he and his dad, their family, had billions of dollars to be able to contribute to this. They can personally pull this off, right? So now David Zaslav hears that and goes, well, I want the best bang for my buck. And quite frankly, despite the billions that the Ellison family has, if I can get Amazon and Apple to, throw their hats into the ring, I can drive this price up and get even more money from one of the three of them, or even Netflix, right? So that's what's happening, is Paramount wants Warner Brothers, and David Zaslav is trying to get the biggest bang for his buck by encouraging a bidding war. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. First of all, what are the odds of this happening? Well, I think the odds of Paramount buying Warner Brothers, obviously, in the current landscape, with the current regime in the White House, it's probably not going to be that difficult. It really isn't. I realize that AT&T, Time Warner, all the antitrust stuff happened in 2018, but part of that was also because the president had an axe to grind against CNN, and he wasn't very pro Time Warner in that regard, and now, depending on how much the Ellisons decide to schmooze him, that could be a case where he thinks that we're changing CNN, we're saving CNN, and he might be inclined to have his regulators and whatnot really lay off because he thinks that they're going to do his bidding in that regard. And I know that that's what so many people are desperately worried about. I posted about this on Threads, and that was the first thing that people immediately chimed in, and Brooklyn Batman was one of them. The idea that now, if that happens, then we're going to see, Warner Brothers turn into, another arm of, Fox News or whatever. And what could that mean for DC Studios? And let's be clear here. That's what we're all really worried about, isn't it? It's the future of DC Studios. That's what most of the people listening to this show right now is worried about. How is any of this going to affect DC Studios? You may not believe what I'm about to tell you, but I'm going to tell you, shoot you straight from my heart, from the opinion, what I think is going to happen. I think that the way that this could potentially affect DC Studios is not at all. And I'm going to tell you why. You notice that when it comes to talking about Warner Brothers' recent success, as far as the 7 straight $40 million opening, Superman was listed as part of that, right? And DC Studios was listed as part of that. Now, make no mistake, the one savvy thing that David Zaslav certainly has done to reposition Warner Brothers as not a fading giant, but as a strong asset, is he's gotten behind the DC Studios plan, right? And he's leveraged the idea of him making DC Studios, right? I talked about how it's the smartest thing that he's done as head of Warner Brothers Discovery, and it is, because he finally understood, beyond what the prior idiots didn't understand. He understood that DC needs to be its own autonomous entity. It must be its own studio, right? And if I do that, and if I hire these guys to actually build a cohesive plan and, take control and organize things in a way that DC's never been organized before in the past, 3 years, then that will only strengthen my position with the brand, because it will inspire confidence in how that brand is being run, right? So tell me why anybody, any one of these buyers would want to screw with that. Tell me why anybody would want to mess with that whatsoever. It's just like how, Marvel Studios, if you recall, they built the MCU plan before Disney bought them, right? Remember, Disney bought them in 2009. Iron Man and Incredible Hulk had already been released by then. Remember, Iron Man was a Paramount film. And I bring that up to bring this up, because I don't remember if I've talked about this before or not. But a month or so ago, when Puck News was floating this idea that Paramount wanted Warner Brothers, I laughed it off. I said, there's no way, they don't have the market cap, they can't pull this off. This is a silly pipe dream. How on earth could this potentially happen? And then, some weeks ago, I saw Paramount's town hall, and I saw David Ellison speak at the town hall about what his thoughts and what his vision for the company was. And he said something that raised my eyebrows. And I may have mentioned this before. If I have, I apologize, but I'm going to mention it again for anybody that didn't hear me talk about this. And I posted about this on Threads as well. He talked about how in 2008, the powers that be at Paramount were all happy with the dollar grosses that they earned on Iron Man, because Iron Man was a Paramount film, is a Paramount film. But he felt, David Ellison that is, felt at the time that since Paramount was in the pole position to buy Marvel Studios, that they should have pulled the trigger on buying Marvel at that point in time. And he really sounded like he lamented the fact that Paramount didn't do that Paramount didn't grab a hold of Marvel Studios when they could have in 2008 before Disney swooped in, and hey, the rest is history. How many billions of dollars later, regardless of what people talk about the MCU now, the MCU has made countless, actually not countless, here, how much has the MCU made in its history? Google says the Marvel Cinematic Universe has grossed over $31 billion worldwide at the box office, making it the highest grossing film franchise in history. That figure represents the combined earnings from all the MCU films, with Deadpool and Wolverine being the most recent blockbuster to contribute to that total. Okay, so it's not counting any of this year. It's funny that it only goes up to 2024, so that's not counting what, that all of the underperforming films, right, from this year. It's not counting Captain America Brave New World. It's not counting Thunderbolts. It's not counting Fantastic Four First Steps. Hey, you know what? Add another billion, right? So $32 billion. It probably just a little over $32 billion if you count the films this year globally, right? Like just going off of that. Okay. So David Ellison brings this up at the town hall when he talks about Paramount, and I was like, but that was when I heard him say that, I thought, okay, now I could buy this. Now I could buy that maybe he is interested in Warner Brothers, because he also talked about, growing up with Paramount, and he did the whole romanticizing routine about films and whatnot. And look, on some level, these CEOs and these one percenters, yes, they do believe in that, right? Personally, they believe in it. But at the end of the day, they want the best bang for their buck. They want the biggest business, right? They want to make the biggest splash. They want the biggest empire in that regard, right? And the other thing that he kept mentioning even more than that particular deal about Paramount being able to buy Marvel Studios in 2008 and they didn't, he kept mentioning that they were chasing Netflix, that they wanted to pursue Netflix, that Netflix was the goal, if you will, right? The one that they were chasing. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to chase Netflix, then you need content. And if you need content, then you're going to have to expand your library. And you're going to have to expand it even bigger than the franchises that you have. And let's see, Paramount's IP consists of Star Trek, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those are your three biggest franchises, right? I would say. As far as IP, Mission Impossible will be another one. So those are your top four, right? Star Trek, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers, Mission Impossible. That's your top four Paramount IP, right? So you're going to need more than that. You are, because HBO has more than that, right? I mean, DC and Harry Potter are big enough on their own in that regard to represent a seismic shift, right? Regardless of how any of us feel about J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter's a cash cow. Seriously. Understand and recognize that the vast majority of the general populace still has no idea how horrible of a subhuman being she is, right? They don't know that. They don't know how terrible she is, and they probably don't care how terrible she is, right? They just like Daniel Radcliffe, and they just love the movies, and they love the books, and they want to go to Diagon Alley at Universal Studios, and that's their thing, right? So there's still power in that as far as the general audience is concerned, despite how much of a toxic waste of space its creator is, its ultimate creator. So if David Ellison's goal is to challenge Netflix, he's going to need that content, and he might be thinking this is an opportunity for a Paramount to make amends, if you will, for not pulling the trigger on Marvel Studios back in 2008 if they really were in the pole position. And I can't turn back the Wayback Machine and tell you that I was watching the landscape at that point in time and knew, they could have done this, they could have done that. I can only go by what he's saying. And if that's the case, and he's looking at this as a do-over, then he wants DC Comics. He wants the DC landscape. He wants DC Studios. He sees an opportunity, especially now that DC Studios is freshly formed, right? It's into its third year, but it's now just starting the DCU. So he sees what Gunn is doing. He sees Creature Commandos, he sees Superman, he sees Peacemaker, and he goes, this is our opportunity. This is now, Superman is essentially Iron Man. And we've even made that comparison on our own, right? About how Superman and Iron Man are the godfathers of their respective universes in that regard, right? We've talked about that. And so why would you want to mess with that? Why would David Ellison want to mess with that? Certainly not. Not if he has a 10-year plan. If he has a 10-year plan, which we know that James Gunn and Peter Safran have a 10-year plan, David Ellison is just counting on that 10-year plan to go forward. And that's why David Zaslav took that victory lap. Now we see why. He took that victory lap in the opening weekend because he's like, here, let's make it all shiny and pretty. We know this movie is going to make money, regardless of how much it might underperform based on the pundits. We know that as far as the valuation of the company, as far as the valuation of DC Studios and the long-term projections, this is going to look great for us. So that's why he took that victory lap as early as he did, to make it more appealing. And I guarantee it's one of the biggest targets for David Ellison in this. I guarantee that. But it's interesting that this piece at cordcutternews.com suggests that the others, like Amazon and Apple and Netflix, also want that. Sure they would. Why not? It's difficult to make new IP that everybody's going to glom on. It is. Disney understands this. That's why they bought Marvel. Marvel is established. Marvel was, interestingly enough, prior to 2008, Marvel was in a similar position that DC had been in until now, right? Fractured all over the place. Licenses are still not in the right place, right? With respect to, at that time, Fox still had the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, right? And they also still had Daredevil at that time, right? Universal still has the Hulk. Sony still has Spider-Man rights in that regard, right? Like, it's a lot more fractured. But not only that, but any of the movies that they were making were kind of all over the place, right? They were aimless. There wasn't really much of a direction. Like, even within, that's one of the jokes that we make about Fox X-Men, is the fact that, continuity is an afterthought in that particular franchise, right? With respect to, they literally started over after X-Men Origins Wolverine and, did prequels with younger actors that kind of, sort of, not entirely fit what we saw with those first three films. So you got X-Men happening, and then you got a Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck with an Elektra sequel, and you've got, all these other projects going on, and there's really no direction. And then Feige and the brain trust sit down in 2007 and they hash out the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan. They build it and execute it before Disney buys it, but Disney sees it and goes, hey, we'll take some of that. And lo and behold, the empire is born. And what exactly did they do to change things? Did they change any of the master plan from what we know, right? Now, we know about the Act Promoter stuff. We know about the division. We know about all of the division between the television and film, and we know about, well, there was this and that. And of course, we also know about what happened when Bob Chapek took over and he was like, content. Yes, we know about all that, right? But by and large, has Kevin Feige and the Marvel Council at Marvel Studios, have they largely executed the MCU the way that they intended to? Yes, absolutely they have. Certainly in terms of building assembly line filmmaking. So, if they did that, and if Disney and the one percenters at Disney, like Bob Iger and whatnot, stood out of their way largely to allow them to execute that, to turn it into the cash cow that it is, why wouldn't David Ellison do the same, right? Why wouldn't the same happen? So to me, they're not going to do anything to DC Studios. They're going to let DC Studios continue because James Gunn is building something. He and Peter Safran are building their own studio empire in that regard. And if he sees it as their next opportunity, as the next MCU, right? If he really sees the DCU as the next MCU, then David Ellison's going to leave it alone. David Ellison's going to say hi to James Gunn. Hey, I'm your new boss. Keep doing what you're doing. That's it, right? This whole idea that all of a sudden James Gunn is going to be at odds because, now I'm working for somebody that's sidling up to the president. Hey, newsflash, his current boss sidles up to the president. Go research David Zaslav and research the connections that are already there between him and the president of the United States currently, right? That's already there. And that's another thing that I think is kind of a sobering reality for a lot of people is when you talk about political concerns with these studios being bought up and consolidated, you have to understand that every single one percenter, every single CEO, every single person that owns all of these studios and companies are not on our side. They are not for the side of the working class. They are not for the side of even the middle class. They're on the side of the ruling class. They're on the side of the one percenters. They're on the side of the people that are currently in the White House right now. They are. Their business interests and their greed are aligned in that regard. So whatever concerns that you have about, it's going to turn into this, it's going to turn into that, well, how come Zaslav hasn't already done that? Well, because he's spinning it, just like you said, Ray, he's polishing it up so that he can sell it off. Yes, exactly, because at the end of the day, they want money. And to me, with respect to what's going on in the United States of America right now, it comes down to good business and bad business. Now, a lot of what's been happening in the last 9 months has been extremely bad business. A lot of it, right? But with respect to audiences and with respect to, people buying movie tickets and buying digital copies and physical copies of movies, you don't turn down money. You just don't. And I don't see any of these studio heads, including David Ellison, turning down money. I think they want everybody's money. I think they don't wish to limit anyone's earning potential. And they know they want families of all races, colors, and creeds in their theaters, buying tickets, going to see whatever DC movie, going to see whatever Harry Potter, Mission Impossible, Transformers, Star Trek, whatever. They want everybody spending money on their product. They don't want to cut off any of that, right? All this other stuff that we've seen in the news, all these other businesses, all these other things that have been happening, bad business. Bigotry is bad business. Racism is bad business. It is. Because anytime that you cut off your earning potential, you're a bad business person, okay? In that regard. I don't think the Ellisons are bad business people. At least, that is the one thing that I can always count on when I'm concerned about bad decisions, possibly infringing their way, is that money will always get in the way of that. Money will always get in the way of, prejudice and whatnot. Green is the ultimate color that anybody pays attention to in that regard. And at that point, they don't care what color, creed, or, sexual orientation you are. They just want your money. They just want your dollars. And so that's why I don't think anything's going to happen with respect to DC Studios. Now, as far as the whole CNN thing, because that's what Elizabeth Warren and others have been, citing the concerns about. The idea of one company owning CNN and CBS News. Well, again, I point to who owns those companies and those news studios in the first place. Has it really been as, completely for the working class as one would think? Maybe it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but I would argue no. I would argue that all news outlets on some level, like all major news outlets, are, they're ruling class, right? Maybe they present themselves, well, no, Ray, CNN is different than Fox News. Is it? Is it really different? Is it really that different? Right? In terms of like whether, because there's two things that you can do. You can either be compliant or you can be complicit. And in the case of those two networks, one could argue that Fox News is compliant with the current regime and CNN is complicit in the current regime. That's all I will say about that. Just leaving it at that, right? If we're really talking about political implications here. But I say all of this to say that all of these concerns with respect to, oh, this is going to change because of that politically, and that's going to change because of this politically, it hasn't changed yet. Like, the one percenters still want the dollars, still want the money. And they know Hollywood is a different business, right? Hollywood is different than other industries. You need brown money. You need, like, money from LGBTQ+. You need money from all audiences. You need money from women. You need money from everybody. You can't just shut that off. So the idea that all of a sudden you're just going to turn all of the content into, one-sidery, no. Marvel still hasn't done that. Whether the Marvels bombed or not, they still made it, right? Like, that's still released 2 years ago, right? Now, if you want to put it in a portfolio and say, well, this is why we can't do this, well, no, that's unfair. But the fact of the matter is, they're still moving forward with what they're going to do. And, how that changes. Captain America Brave New World still happened. Thunderbolt still happened. Fantastic Four First Steps still happen in that regard, right? So it goes as far as the greed takes them in that regard. So no, I don't think that this spells like this death knell, this like, oh, well, now this is going to change. No, I don't think it's going to be that at all, because I think at the end of the day, they need content. And they're going to let DC Studios do what they do as far as their 10-year plan. Now, if something happens in the middle of the 10-year plan that, affects the dollar grosses, right? That affects the budgets and affects the earnings potential, that's something totally different. But that's something within the framework of, Gunn and Safran's plan. We've talked about, how next year, and we talked about this on Vodka Stream a couple weeks ago, about how next year is going to be the true test for DC Studios and the DCU. Because it's going to be all content that isn't James Gunn written and oriented, right? Lanterns, Damon Lindelof. Supergirl, Craig Gillespie. Clayface, James Watkins and Mike Flanagan, right? Like, it's all going to be non-James Gunn specific in that regard. And so next year will arguably be the true test of the DCU's content in that regard, right? But hey, they're off to a strong start, and I'm sure the Ellisons see that, and they go, hey, we'll take that. And, keep it going, right? Not just flip it into, whatever right-wing fantasy they think they're going to turn into. No, because they want money. They want everybody's money. Good business people want money, right? And if you want to run your business into the ground, that's when you start cutting off what audiences it's going to appeal to. When you don't do that, and when you keep your audiences vast and varied and diverse, regardless of how you feel about DEI and the like, that's when you make money, right? Why are there so many Fast and Furious movies, whether you like them or not? Because Universal smartly allowed that cast and crew to maintain their diversity and to reach a wide audience. And that wide audience kept spending money on tickets, kept buying the movies, kept asking for more, right? That's why there are 10 of them plus the Hobbs and Shaw spinoff. That's why, right? It's literally business 101 in that regard. And until proven otherwise, I expect David and Larry Ellison to proceed that way. I really do. If this actually goes through, if this happens, Paramount buys Warner Brothers and they get control of DC Studios, I expect them to leave James Gunn and Peter Safran largely alone. I really do. Right? Now, the CNN and the CBS stuff, listen, as far as news, that's a whole other concern. But like I said, all news outlets, all the major news outlets are pretty much owned by the same group of people anyway. And they're either, like I said, compliant or complicit. So how much is really changing in that regard as far as like what we've got, right? I know the consolidation is great. The real worry with consolidation isn't about whether or not the message changes, isn't about whether or not operations necessarily change. It's really about how many jobs get lost because of consolidation. That's really what it's about. That's what it was about 8 years ago or 7 years ago rather, when Disney bought Fox, it wasn't about what they were going to do with X-Men. It wasn't about what they were going to do with Fantastic Four. It was about how many jobs were going to be lost. It was about how many people were going to be, out on the streets, not being able because they've been replaced or because they've got to cut down because they just don't need this much overhead for certain operations, right? That's where we're at with respect to that. And so that would be the question. That'd be the real concern if Paramount does buy Warner Brothers, is what would it do to their workforce? It'd be a similar concern, maybe not quite the same concern with Apple and Amazon, because with those companies primarily being tech and commerce, there's not as much of a concern in terms of overlapping operations. With Paramount, though, especially since they just merged with a production company, studio resources could be at a premium, if you will. But it also depends on whether or not they want to use Warner Brothers resources and manpower, like humanity, if you will, like workforce, I guess is the best way to put it. If they want to use their workforce to supplement their operations, especially when it comes to DC Studios and Harry Potter and other franchises that they've got. So we just have to wait and see. But no, I think that the way that this deal is being talked about, I think it's intriguing that they want to get all of it before the split happens instead of waiting for the split. And I get why, because but the thing is like you talk about diluting the brand. Well, would it be cheaper or more expensive to buy streamers and studios later, right? Or do you have some other type of, and this is where the antitrust stuff really does come into play, is would you be allowed to, will they tell you, will the regulators actually tell you, well, you can't buy it until you can't buy CNN? Because that's what happened with Fox, right? Fox was told that they had to ditch their, couldn't bring over Fox News and had to ditch its regional sports networks, the 22 regional sports networks that it had, like Fox Sports Detroit and Fox Sports Southwest and stuff like that. They had to ditch that. They could not bring that over because you can't have that combined with ESPN and ABC News and all that and whatnot, right? Will the regulators tell Paramount the same thing? You can't merge CNN and CBS. Will they say that? I don't know. It's unpredictable at this point. With all the deregulation that has gone on during both Trump presidencies, it's undetermined. I can't tell you that antitrust is going to be that big of a concern here in that regard. It just doesn't seem like that because it's literally the 1%ers glad handing each other in this regard. So personally, I think the odds of this happening are pretty high. I don't know if they're super high or if they're like immediate or if it's like certain, but I think it's pretty solid, and we'll see. But the question is, how is it going to happen, right? Is it actually going to be a case where Paramount buys the whole thing, right? With the studios and streamers, and CNN included, and TNT and TBS and all that? Or are they going to make them wait until April 2026 to pull the trigger when it's all separated? I don't know. We'll see. And then, as far as the others buying it, let's go ahead and shoot this one down for all the Snyder cultists and whatnot. No, not Netflix. Here, I'll tell you what. Better way to put it. Let's be more specific with this, right? Let's make this clear for any Snyder cultist out there that might even remotely be listening to this. Let's make this abundantly clear. If for some reason David Zaslav does get his bidding war, and somehow, some way, Netflix does happen to outbid Apple, Amazon, and Paramount for Warner Brothers, no, they're not bringing the Snyderverse back. It's not going to happen. They're going to do the same thing that I suspect David Ellison is going to do if Paramount buys Warner Brothers. They're going to shake James Gunn and Peter Safran's hand and say, keep doing what you're doing, right? Especially in their case, because they'll be autonomous. Netflix won't have to use any of its own resources. They'll just be like, hey, we've got a studio here underneath us that's taking care of the overhead. Boom. The only thing that would concern me at that point is physical releases. It's like, okay, no, don't mess with my steel books. Don't mess with my physical releases. That shit better still happen. Netflix is still not great with that, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So that's the biggest thing that concerns me is like, don't screw with physical releases. But no, under no circumstances, if Netflix were to outbid the others for Warner Brothers, under no circumstances, if they were to become in control of DC Studios, would they bring the Snyderverse back? No, the Snyderverse is dead. Dead, 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 dead. Dead, dead, dead. The DCEU is dead, 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 dead. The DCU lives. The DCEU is dead. And Netflix would look James Gunn square in the eye and go, Make us more Superman movies. Keep doing what you're doing. Continue your 10-year plan. That's the catbird seat, okay? So that's why I'm not scared, guys. That's why I'm not worried about the future of DC Studios, because Zaslav put his full faith behind that 10-year plan, basically as a way to demonstrate to prospective buyers, hey, DC Studios is set. DC Studios is the next MCU. DC Studios is the next Marvel Studios in that regard, right? You can leave them alone because they're one of your biggest assets. No, let's not kid ourselves. They're your biggest asset. Let them cook. Let James Gunn and Peter Safran cook. You'll be just fine, right? That's what I largely suspect is going to happen with respect to our primary interest. Now, all the other stuff, politically inclined and whatnot, all the news concerns and whatnot, look, all that remains to be seen. But look, I'm not telling you the consolidation isn't a great thing, or like I'm telling you it is a great thing, right? I'm also not telling you that it's the end of the world, right? I know a lot of people that go to the extremes and freak out one way or the other, and they can't find any type of middle ground or silver lining when consolidation occurs. Look, when Disney and Fox, came together, when Disney bought Fox, that was a case where so many people were excited about the X-Men being under Fox, and now they'll finally get done properly, right? And they ignored all of the thousands of jobs that were being lost. And that was what I focused on. I was like, listen, I know that you guys are happy that the X-Men are going to be under the MCU, but a lot of people are about to lose their jobs. It's the same with any merger in that regard, right? There are pluses and minuses to the idea of Paramount buying Warner Brothers in this regard. There are pluses and minuses. Okay, the pluses would be if you merge Paramount Plus and HBO Max, you would be smart enough, and I would hope that the Ellisons would be smart enough to realize that HBO Max has the better UI, the better user interface, and Paramount Plus's user interface would get overhauled in that regard, right? And we'd be talking about that the app, for all the Paramount content that we do want to watch would be so much better in that regard in terms of navigation in that regard, right? So that's a plus. The massive library, they really would. I mean, Warner Brothers library already, I think, is like second to only Netflix in that regard, and now this would really push it. If they were to combine with Paramount, that would really push it closer to Netflix's library, and probably significantly better with terms of subjective quality in that regard, right? So there's pluses there. You wouldn't lose the physical media possibilities. With Apple and Amazon, I think physical media is certainly still a thing. Netflix, I'm never sure about it, right, in that regard, as far as if this bidding war does materialize. So physical media releases would still occur, right? Like I said, I think DC Studios would be pretty well insulated to at least proceed under their 10-year plan so long as everything went off without a hitch under their 10-year plan. Whatever like pivots they have to make in that 10-year plan, right, they can do that. But I don't foresee a scenario where David Ellison is going to do the Bob Chapek thing and be like, content. No, if he sees something working, that's another thing that a good businessman should do is you see something working, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's no reason to upset the apple cart. You don't go to James Gunn and tell him, well, now you got to start doing everything the assembly line way like Marvel Studios. No, he doesn't. He needs to do everything the way that he's currently doing it as long as he is succeeding, right? And we can say so far that he is succeeding. So there's really no reason objectively for anything like that to change with respect to the DC Studios operation, right? And we'll see what happens with them next year. And then the obvious minus is, again, like I said, loss of jobs, loss of workforce, right? The cutting down things like that. That's really where it comes down to. As far as competition is concerned, Paramount, like for the last number of years, when people have erroneously said, and I still say it's erroneous, when people have erroneously said, hey, Paramount just needs to ditch their app. No, that's not how it flipping works. You can't tell them to ditch CBS off a traditional marketplace. You're not going to tell them to get rid of an entire channel. They're going to keep it. Apps are channels. Apps are TV networks. They're just on the internet, not over the air. You don't just cut those off in that regard, right? So we talked for years about how Paramount and Peacock were not on the same level as even Warner Brothers or Hulu or Disney or anything like that, right? And nobody was on Netflix's level. So now you're talking about one of the smaller fries in Tier 3 or Tier 4, pairing up with the Tier 2 to take on The Godfather, Netflix. So like how much is it really eroding the competition? Disney's still there. Disney absolutely is still there. Disney and all the Fox properties are still there. Netflix is still there. They're not going anywhere. And then Apple and Amazon are still there. So personally, I don't know that that it's going to erode competition. I think that's what the antitrust lawyers and like whatnot are going to say. is how much does it really erode competition in that regard? I don't think it does. I think people immediately latch onto that as an extreme because they're like, oh no, another studio is gobbling one up. Well, one wasn't as big as the other. Paramount, as storied of a studio as it's been, Warner Brothers is bigger. And you're trying to get to a content level of Netflix. And remember, you're also trying to get to a subscriber base as big as Netflix. HBO Max, per that story, 100 million subscribers, 78 million in Paramount Plus. Netflix has 301 million subscribers and counting, right? All the people that claim that they were going to ditch, when it got to $24.99, oh, I'm ditching my Netflix. No, you're not. No, you're not. And you never did, and you're still not going to. You're ready for the end of Stranger Things. You're ready for the next version of Squid Game. You're ready for the next season of Wednesday, right? That's what you're locked into, okay? You are a Netflix disciple. That's fine. That's fine. There's no shame in that, right? This is consumerism. I'm not telling you that it's, like the greatest thing in the world, but, let's not act like it's this, incredibly sacrilegious thing. No, we all consume content, guys. We're all content consumers. And, there's a lot of intellectual stuff that we need to hang on to ourselves, like creative juices and everything. But, at the end of the day, this doesn't change the landscape a whole lot for us other than, it moves more to streaming in that regard, right? But you were already, watching HBO Max for something, whether it was, Peacemaker or Superman, which will be on HBO Max this Friday, right? James Gunn announced that today, whatever it is, right? You already had HBO Max for something. Maybe you didn't have Paramount Plus, or maybe you did like I do for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, right? And anything in the Star Trek landscape, right? Well, the idea of combining both, I mean, that can help a consumer potentially as far as, well, you've only got one app to deal with as opposed to two in that regard, right? There are pluses and minuses to this. I'm not telling you it's the best thing in the world, but I'm also not telling you it's the worst thing in the world either, right? That's just how it is in that regard. So that's where I sit with it, and, time will tell. We've just got to observe exactly how this shakes out. We know that ultimately the Ellison family and Paramount want Warner Brothers. We know that. That has been made clear based on what the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times tell us. They want it. Now, whether or not Zaslav gets to engineer this bidding war between them and, Tim Cook at Apple and Jeff Bezos at Amazon and Reed Hastings. Is it still Reed Hastings at Netflix, or who's the CEO of Netflix? Google says it's Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos. Okay, whoever it may be in those regards. We'll see how it shakes out, and we'll all be paying attention to it, right? And it's just one more thing to pay attention to with respect to the business at hand. So we'll see. We will see exactly how it goes. But yeah, plenty to observe as we continue forward here. We still got half a season of Peacemaker to watch. We got Superman popping up on HBO Max, and we will surely hear about streaming numbers for Superman on HBO Max pretty soon. The physical release is about to hit, as far as that steel book that a bunch of us pre-order that should be dropping within the next week or so, right? So yeah, we're going to hear some more numbers, and we're still going to hear some more numbers now, right? All of a sudden, you're going to hear a glut of reporting numbers with respect to success for Warner Brothers and DC Studios in particular to make it even more appealing for this bidding war that David Zaslav wants to allegedly engineer in order to get the most bang for his buck for selling Warner Brothers, right? So yeah, as it turns out, he did turn out to be that spit-shine guy. He polished up the company enough to sell it to the highest bidder, and now he's trying to pick which one of the four he's going to sell it to, whether it's the Ellisons and Paramount, or whether it's Apple, or whether it's Amazon, or whether it's Netflix. Which again, just to be clear, if it is Netflix, no, the Snyderverse shan't return. I would love just to make certain that is killed, just to make certain that narrative goes away. Don't ask that question. No, absolutely not. Shan't be happening, regardless of who buys them. All right, so definitely want to talk about that, because that was certainly the biggest news, I think, that happened over the last week or so that I hadn't talked about yet, for sure. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the FliteCast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope that the break wasn't too long for you. If you have any thoughts with respect to any of what I talked about, whether it is your thoughts about Robert Redford, your thoughts about the Emmys, and certainly your thoughts with respect to Paramount and Warner Brothers and the conglomeration and stuff, and any concerns that you have, because I'm sure that you either agree or disagree with my perspectives. If you have any thoughts with respect to that you haven't shared already, You know where to find me on Instagram and on Threads at the FliteCast, on Blue Sky at FliteCast. You can comment on the posting for this episode on the FliteCast YouTube channel. There's also the FliteCast Facebook page. And of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. Don't forget, hopefully this Thursday will be a new episode of Flightbox catching up on the end of Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and then another episode of Flightbox to talk about the last two episodes, episodes 4 and 5 of Peacemaker Season 2 in the DCU, and then Flight Chat, of course, on Sunday. But until then, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.